Welcome to The Explainer. I am incredibly excited to have you here today because, well, we're going to dive deep into a genuinely fascinating theme. We're exploring state power, but we're doing it from three wildly different academic perspectives. We're going to unpack exactly what authority is, how it functions in our day-to-day lives, and ultimately how it gets challenged. So, let's jump right in. The big question we're tackling is, how does the state actually exercise power? It's a massive, incredibly complex question, right? In this explainer, we're going to trace the entire concept of authority. We'll start from the highly practical, nitty-gritty mechanics of daily regulation, then we'll move into some deep philosophical theories about bodily control, and finally we'll land on the ultimate ideological resistance to power itself. So, here's our roadmap for the journey. First up, the mechanics of state regulation. Second, Foucault's concept of biopolitics. And third, anarchism, rejecting the state.
All right, Section 1, the mechanics of state regulation.
We're kicking things off by looking at a highly granular, super practical example of state power. Now, to the casual observer, the UK Corporation Tax Code probably sounds like a great cure for insomnia. But honestly, it's actually a fascinating chess match. On one hand, the state syncs its laws with standard accounting practices, GAAP, just to keep things moving smoothly. But at the exact same time, it has to aggressively combat manipulation through anti-avoidance rules. Add in the shift to self-assessment to make sure taxes are actually collected, plus the overarching pressure from international bodies like the EU and the World Trade Organization, and suddenly, reforming this tax code isn't just dry accounting anymore. It's a vivid, real-time demonstration of the state actively adapting its rules to assert control over global corporate interests. It's literally the state managing its power in real time.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core tension in public law: efficiency versus fairness. It's like a perpetual tug-of-war. On one side, the state desperately wants efficiency, streamlined rules that align with how businesses actually operate to keep the market moving. But on the other side, it absolutely needs fairness. It has to shut down those tax avoidance loopholes so corporations pay their fair share and compete on a level playing field. It's a constant balancing act between keeping the market efficient and enforcing the rules fairly.
Edward John Snape's research really hit the nail on the head here. To quote his work, what are presented as impartial legal arguments are often simply rival views of the public interest. So the crucial takeaway is that these highly technical, boring-sounding negotiations between massive corporations and the state, they aren't just about math or simple compliance. They are deeply political practices. They completely mask rival views of what the public interest actually is, all wrapped up in the incredibly complex language of tax law. Okay, moving on to Section 2, Foucault's concept of biopolitics. This leads us to a pretty fascinating transition. Think about it. If the state manages corporate entities through complex tax grids and financial regulations, how does it manage the actual physical lives of its citizens? Well, enter Michel Foucault and his concept of biopolitics. This is defined as a political rationality that takes the administration of life and populations as its subject to ensure, sustain, and multiply life. Foucault argued that modern state power isn't just about collecting taxes or defending territory anymore. It heavily focuses on the biological administration of entire populations. It's fundamentally about putting life itself in order. To really grasp this, we kind of have to look backward. Think back to the 17th century. Sovereign power was fundamentally juridical, meaning it was the right of the ruler to literally decide life and death. The sovereign basically had the power to take your life or let you live. But modern biopower? Foucault argues it is totally different. It's a positive power designed to foster, optimize, and multiply life. It is this massive shift from a power whose effects are just limits and lack to a power completely bent on generating, supervising, and ordering the very forces of life. Let's break down exactly how this works in practice. Instead of just a single king sitting on a throne shouting orders, biopower operates through dispersed networks and material coercions. It actively supervises our biological processes. We're talking everything from propagation and birth rates to overall health and mortality statistics. And by doing this, it essentially integrates our physical bodies directly into the machinery of capitalist production. Ultimately, it enacts policies and even wages wars to defend the biological existence of the society as a whole, rather than just defending a sovereign ruler. This biopolitical grid basically became an indispensable element of capitalism by carefully, systematically inserting our bodies into the machinery of economic production. Now, Foucault draws a very stark conclusion from all this, and it's essential we understand this impartially as we unpack his theory. He introduces the concept of state racism. He defines this as society directed against itself to define a biological norm. His theory argues that this modern shift toward defending a biological population inevitably creates a mechanism of permanent internal purification. The state purifies its own society against anyone who deviates from the defined biological norm, portraying one group as the true race that holds power. It is a really dark, structural consequence of a state that manages a population purely as a biological entity that needs to be optimized.
Which brings us to Section 3, Anarchism, Rejecting the State.
So, having seen how deeply the state integrates into both our corporate finances and our literal biological lives, we're now going to zoom way out to the total ideological rejection of this entire apparatus. The foundational view of anarchism is that the state has to be abolished because it is unnecessary and/or evil and corrupting. We're introducing this neutrally as a radical political ideology that demands the absolute removal of all authority based on hierarchy. And for anarchists, this doesn't just mean getting rid of the government, it includes dismantling organized religion and capitalism too. Basically, if it is hierarchical, they argue it has got to go.
Anarchists mount three core objections against the state. First, morally, they argue it relies entirely on physical coercion and deceit, completely restricting the liberty of rational, sovereign individuals. Second, economically, they don't see the state as some neutral referee. They view it as the ultimate agent of modern capitalism, defending economic inequality and protecting wealthy elites through global institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. And third, on a deeply human level, they believe state authority just crushes our natural initiative and creativity. It forces the individual to suspend their own reason and commands people against their will, like, for example, forcing them to fight in a war.
Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, what about voting? Well, the anarchist view is that parliamentary democracy is not a real social contract. Rather, they see elections as a fraudulent smokescreen that's ultimately backed by the threat of police and military violence. The purpose? To deceive people into thinking they're the actual decision-makers, while in reality, it just encourages conformism and keeps a ruling elite securely in power.
So if the state is the ultimate problem, how do they propose dismantling it? Historically, this has taken a lot of different forms, and it really escalates as we go through them. It started with passive withdrawal, championed by Henry Thoreau, who famously retreated to a forest cabin by Walden Pond back in the 1840s to just make the state irrelevant to his existence. Others, like William Godwin, focused on creating a moral society through education and science, hoping the state would eventually just kind of wither away. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon took an economic route, suggesting we build voluntary mutualist networks to peacefully replace state structures over time. But then, it escalates. Mikhail Bakunin advocated for direct action. We're talking mass strikes, refusing to pay taxes, and targeted violence to trigger a popular revolt. And taking it to the absolute extreme, Max Stirner called for total individual insurrection against all external authority.
Wow, we have covered incredible ground today. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative question. Is state power a necessary tool for fairness, like we saw in the delicate balancing act of the tax codes? Is it a positive, yet potentially very dangerous mechanism of biological control, like Foucault warned? Or is it an inherently oppressive force that must be entirely dismantled, just as the anarchists argue? I challenge you to look critically at the world around you and decide for yourself the true nature of authority. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.